Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into something quite mind-bending from our sources. It's this idea called the postmodern paradox of containment. And it's captured by this brilliant metaphor, a net of jugs. We all do it constantly, right? We categorize our world, ideas, who we are, the systems we live in.
Constantly.
But what happens when we try to hold things that are, fundamentally fluid inside containers that seem fixed? Our sources ask us to picture these jugs as the containers for ideas, identities, institutions.
Right, the things we use to sort reality.
And the net, that's what connects them, binds them together, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly.
Exactly.
But here's the big question we want to explore. What happens when every single one of those jugs leaks? Seriously, what if they all leak? And how does that leakage, reshape how we understand the world? And maybe even ourselves.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that this isn't just abstract theory. It's not philosophy in an ivory tower. This net of jugs metaphor, it's actually like a mirror. It reflects how modern life kind of feels.
That's a great way to put it.
It gives you a shortcut, really, to understanding the invisible structures we navigate every day. You get those aha moments about how information works, how identity gets managed.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack some surprising insights, I think, and give you some fresh ways to look at things.
Okay, let's do that. Let's unpack this net of jugs metaphor a bit more because, like you said, it's richer than it first appears.
Yeah.
Let's start with the jugs. What exactly are these, according to the sources?
Okay, so they represent, everything from literal physical containers to conceptual categories, our identities, big institutions.
Okay, so give me an example of an identity jug.
Think about categories like gender, race, class, your job, your nationality. These are all jugs we kind of find ourselves in or maybe adopt.
Right, they define aspects of us.
But here's the crucial bit, the twist. They're often seen as inherently porous. They leak. They aren't perfectly sealed, watertight vessels.
They leak. That's the key.
That's absolutely key to the paradox.
Okay, so if jugs are the individual containers, what about the net?
Right, so if the jugs hold specific things, the net is the bigger structure, the overarching system.
And its job is?
Well, its job is either to bind these jugs together, make them into a coherent system. Okay. Or it acts like a filter. It decides which jugs count, which ones are important, maybe even which ones are allowed to exist in the first place.
Can you give some examples of that net?
Sure. Think about legal systems defining citizenship. That's a net.
Okay.
Or bureaucracies processing your identity documents, digital platforms using algorithms to categorize you, global markets setting rules, even like the established ways of thinking in academia, those are all nets.
Wow, okay, so they're everywhere.
Pretty much. And a key thing about the net is its flexibility, or lack thereof. Sometimes it's incredibly rigid, fixed. Other times it stretches, it adapts, and that subtly changes the shape of the jugs it holds.
Digging through the sources, that idea really jumped out at me, that every single jug leaks. Not just some, but all of them. It's inherent.
Yeah.
What does that really mean for us?
It means leakage isn't an accident. It's inherent porousness, the imperfection baked into containment itself.
Okay.
It means our neat categories, our definitions, they never fully capture the fluid realities they try to hold.
So like my identity.
Exactly. Your identity is never perfectly fixed or contained by just one label. And any system we build, any institution, it inevitably has cracks, has leaks.
Can you give an example of that identity leak?
Sure. Think about, say, you identify strongly with your profession. You're a teacher. That's a jug.
Right.
But that label, teacher, it doesn't contain your love of gardening or your political views or your role in your family or your secret passion for, competitive eating.
Okay, got it.
All those other parts of you leak beyond that professional jug.
Yeah.
They show its limits.
So is this leakage? Is it a problem? A flaw? Or is it just how things are, maybe even good?
That's a really important question the sources raise. Is leakage a flaw, or is it just a fundamental feature of being? It can definitely be a source of anxiety. When categories don't hold, it can feel destabilizing, right?
Sure, like things aren't clear.
But it can also be a source of liberation. It allows for fluidity, for change, for resisting labels that feel wrong.
That's a fascinating split.
Yeah.
Can you give a situation where it's both for someone? Both anxiety and freedom.
Absolutely. Let's take someone who's assigned gender at birth. Their official identity jug just doesn't match their internal sense of self, their lived reality.
Okay.
That mismatch, that leakage from the assigned category can cause real anxiety, distress. It's friction against a container that doesn't fit.
I can see that.
But at the same time, for that exact person, embracing that leakage, expressing their true gender identity outside the confines of that initial jug, that can be incredibly liberating. It's finding freedom in the leakiness. So leakage itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's about how we experience it and, crucially, how the systems, the nets, respond to it.
So if these jugs are leaky, and maybe that's not always bad, why contain things at all? What's the core contradiction here, the paradox of containment?
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The tension is this. Containment needs fixity. It needs boundaries to work.
To make sense of things, yeah.
To identify, categorize, even just think about something. We need those conceptual boxes, those jugs.
Yep.
The things we're trying to contain, especially in our complex modern world identities, ideas, cultures, systems, they inherently resist being fixed.
They're fluid.
Exactly. They're fragmented. They're constantly performed. They're, as the sources put it, rhizomatic.
Rhizomatic, like plant roots spreading out.
Precisely. Spreading unpredictably, interconnected, pushing against neat lines. So the paradox is, we need containers to make sense of the world, to act. They provide clarity. But by trying to hold fluid things in static shells, they inevitably create the very leakage that undermines their own purpose. The containment enables understanding, but it simultaneously undoes its own basis because reality keeps leaking out.
Right.
It's a system that sort of subverts itself.
Sounds almost like it goes in circles,
Yeah.
layers upon layers.
It does, and the metaphor actually gets deeper. The sources talk about ontological strata.
Ontological strata. Okay, break that down.
Think of it like nested levels of being. First, you have objects, the basic things, like a person, a text, an event, first-order beings.
Got it.
Then you have containers, the categories or models we use to understand those objects, like student, novel, protest, second-order beings.
Okay, containers for the objects.
Right. And then above that, you have meta-containers. These are third-order beings, like a whole ideology, a dominant cultural narrative, or what's called an epistemic regime.
An epistemic regime.
Yeah, basically a whole system for how we decide what counts as knowledge, how we validate truth in a particular era or field.
Right.
So the net of jugs implies this looping system. Containers, holding other containers, all wrapped in a net that is itself a kind of container, a meta-container, and also a capture device.
It's turtles all the way down and up.
Kind of. It's recursive. It stretches through these different layers of reality.
Okay, that's the mechanics.
Yeah.
But what does it actually feel like to live inside this system? To be in a jug, within a net? The sources had some really evocative descriptions.
It did.
First, there's this feeling of ambiguous solidity, where the categories we use, like being a professional or a citizen, they feel really solid, really meaningful. They structure our lives.
They do give us anchors.
But at the same time, you kind of sense they're unreliable, maybe even flimsy when they're really tested. Like the structure looks strong, but you suspect it could wobble.
It's like knowing the label is real in its effects, but maybe not the whole truth of the thing it labels.
Exactly. Then there's hyperreflexivity.
Ah, yes. The awareness.
That feeling where you become super aware that you are being categorized, that you're living inside these jugs.
You see the strings, so to speak.
Yeah. And your identity starts feeling less like just who you are and more like a role you're playing for those categories.
Performance becomes key.
Right. Like how you act in a job interview versus with your family. You're consciously performing the professional jug or the family member jug.
Navigating the containers.
And the third feeling they mentioned was nesting anxiety.
This one's interesting.
It's like every time something gets defined or contained, you feel this nagging need for another bigger container to justify that definition.
An endless regress.
Sort of. Like, okay, I'm an artist. But then you think, what kind of artist? And what does that category really mean? It's this constant search for a higher level jug to give it ultimate meaning, which might never come.
A sort of conceptual restlessness.
Exactly.
And, this connects directly to knowledge itself. Knowledge operates like a jug. How so? Well, to claim you know something. What is that? It's placing phenomena into a definition, a model, a theory, right? You're putting it in a knowledge jug.
Okay, I see that. A theory is a container for explaining something.
Precisely. But these knowledge jugs, the sources stress, they're never neutral. They aren't perfect reflections of reality.
They're built by people.
Exactly. They're historically contingent, built by certain people at certain times, often for specific purposes. They carry biases, assumptions.
So what does that mean for truth? I mean, there's no such thing.
That's the crucial point. It doesn't necessarily lead to nihilism, saying nothing is true. Instead, the sources suggest something like pluralized accuracy.
Pluralized accuracy, okay.
It means truth becomes more contextual, more practice-based, rather than some single, universal, capital T truth.
Like different tools for different jobs.
Perfect analogy. Think of a map of a city. It's a knowledge jug. It's incredibly accurate for navigating streets, right? Useful. But that same map is totally inaccurate for showing, say, the underground subway lines, or the history of the buildings, or the cultural vibe of different neighborhoods.
You need different maps, different jugs for those.
Exactly. Each map, each model, each theory is accurate for its specific purpose, but none is the absolute final truth of the city. Our knowledge containers are provisional tools. We need to be aware of their limits and revise them.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not anything goes, but different tools for different truths.
Precisely. Provisional, useful, but never perfectly complete or neutral.
So, bringing this back down to earth, what does this all mean practically? It feels like more than just a thought experiment. There are real stakes here, aren't there? Political, ethical.
Huge stakes, because containment, as you said, is never neutral. It's always an act of power.
Right. The real kicker is asking, who gets to decide?
Exactly. Who decides which jugs exist? How are they defined? How are they arranged in the net? Who benefits from that arrangement?
And this power has two sides, doesn't it? The sources talk about the dual nature.
Absolutely. Containment can be incredibly oppressive.
Like how?
Think about bureaucratic systems that exclude people based on rigid categories, or the history of racialization, forcing people into harmful jugs. That's containment used to control and harm.
Yeah, definitely.
But paradoxically, containment can also be protective, enabling.
How so?
Think about privacy rights. That's about containing your personal information, protecting it. Or identity-based civil rights. They use categories, jugs like race or gender, to protect groups who've been marginalized by those same categories historically.
Huh. So the same mechanism creating a boundary can be used for harm or for protection.
It's a powerful tool, and like any tool, it depends entirely on who wields it and for what purpose.
Which leads to the question of resistance, right? If the system is powerful, how do you push back? How do you subvert containment?
That's a major challenge, because when people or groups leak, when they don't fit or actively resist a category, the system often responds in clever ways.
Like what?
It might just ignore the leakage, pretend it isn't happening, maintain the status quo. Or, perhaps more effectively, it builds a new container, specifically designed to capture that overflow, to manage the dissent or the difference.
So you resist one box, and they just build you a slightly different box.
Often, yes. It can feel like trying to escape gravity. The impulse to categorize and contain is very strong in complex societies.
So, ethically, what should we be aiming for? If perfect, leak-proof containers are impossible, and maybe not even desirable, what's the goal?
Well, the sources suggest an ethical approach focuses on the design of the jugs and nets.
Okay.
Aim for transparency. Make the purpose of the container clear. Make it accountable for its effects. Make it auditable so we can see how it's working.
And acknowledge the leaks.
Crucially, yes. Acknowledge the inherent leaks instead of pretending to be watertight. Build in that awareness of imperfection, not as a bug, but as a feature of reality we have to work with.
Right, so it's not about smashing all the jugs. That sounds like chaos.
Exactly. The goal isn't pure dissolution. It's about designing better containers.
Better jugs, better nets.
Jugs that are clear about their purpose, honest about their limits, and nets that can stretch, that can loosen up, maybe even dissolve when they've served their purpose, instead of becoming rigid and suffocating.
That sounds much more hopeful. Are there practical ways to do that? Real strategies?
Yes, the sources offer several really insightful practical responses. These are things people designing systems or institutions could actually use.
Okay, let's hear them.
One is pragmatic containment. Accept that we need temporary provisional jugs, but make them minimal, easily revisable, and specific to the context.
Like roles on a short-term project team.
Exactly. Clear for the task, but everyone knows they're temporary and can change. Just enough containment for now.
Okay, what else?
Another idea is building a pluralized lattice. Instead of one big top-down rigid net.
Like a strict hierarchy.
Right. Instead, create overlapping non-hierarchical nets. Allow different jugs, different ways of categorizing, to coexist side by side. Focus on interoperability, letting systems talk to each other rather than forcing everything into one single master taxonomy.
So less about forcing one label, more about letting multiple descriptions exist together.
Precisely. Think about online identity. A pluralized lattice might let you present different facets on different platforms without one defining your whole digital self.
Interesting. Any more?
Yes, meta-governance. This is about creating processes specifically to review and, importantly, sunset jugs.
Sunset them, like retire them.
Exactly. To retire categories when they're no longer useful and become harmful, this prevents what they call ossification categories, hardening and becoming resistant to necessary change.
We need a way to clean out the old, outdated jugs.
We do. Think of outdated job titles or old bureaucratic forms that just don't make sense anymore. Meta-governance provides a mechanism for that cleanup.
Okay, one more.
Finally, conditional containment. This means treating containers explicitly as tools with specific aims, and having really clear norms about when a particular jug applies and, crucially, when it must yield to other factors.
So a category used for taxes shouldn't define your access to healthcare, for instance.
Exactly. The tax jug applies in the tax context, but it doesn't get to dictate everything else. Its application is conditional.
And these ideas apply broadly.
Hugely. Institutional design in education, government, tech platforms, how we manage user data, even how academic fields define themselves. It's all nets and jugs.
Wow. Okay, we've really journeyed through this net of jugs today. We've seen how containment is, well, necessary. We needed to act, think, organized.
Can't function without some structure.
But it gets dangerous when we assume those containers are permanent or perfect or neutral.
When we forget they're leaky, human-made tools.
Yeah. The metaphor really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? It asks you, the listener, how are you being held? By what categories, what systems?
And how do you, in turn, hold others? What jugs do you place people in?
Can we learn to live with these leaky jugs and straining nets more honestly, understanding their temporary nature, their power dynamics?
Maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. What if we didn't just acknowledge the leaks, but actually tried to leverage them?
Leverage the leaks. How?
Could we design systems that use that inherent fluidity, that imperfection, to become more adaptable, more resilient? Much like a crisis can painfully reveal the rigidity of old jugs, perhaps embracing the leaks could be a source of creative solutions for our constantly changing world. What would that look like?
That's a fantastic question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the really fascinating world of the net of jugs. Keep questioning the categories around you, keep noticing the leaks, and keep exploring. We'll catch you next time.